Your mind holds power beyond anything you've ever imagined, waiting right now to be unleashed, transformed, and directed toward the extraordinary life you deserve. Every single thought you think, every mental habit you practice, every moment you choose to strengthen your inner world rather than letting it drift, these are the building blocks of unstoppable mental power. George Stratton discovered something remarkable, something that changes everything about how we understand our own potential, and in the minutes ahead, you're going to learn exactly how to tap into that power, reshape your thinking, and become the person you've always known you could be. The human mind is not a fixed entity, frozen in place by genetics or circumstance or past failures. It's a living, breathing, evolving force that responds to training just like your muscles respond to exercise. When Stratton began his groundbreaking work on mental development, he wasn't just theorizing from an ivory tower. He was observing real people making real transformations, watching as individuals who thought they'd reached their limits suddenly broke through into new territories of capability, creativity, and personal power. What he found was revolutionary. The brain doesn't just store information passively, it actively reorganizes itself based on how you use it, what you focus on, and the mental disciplines you practice daily. Think about this for a moment. Really let it sink in. Right now, your brain is physically changing based on what you're doing with it. Neural pathways are forming, strengthening, or fading away depending on your mental habits. The person who spends their days in worry and anxiety is literally building a brain that's better at worrying and feeling anxious. The person who practices focused attention, creative thinking, and purposeful mental discipline is building a completely different brain, one that's wired for success, resilience, and extraordinary achievement. This isn't motivational fluff. This is neuroscience meeting ancient wisdom, and the implications are staggering. Stratton understood that mental power isn't about being born brilliant or lucky or in the right circumstances. It's about understanding the fundamental principles of how consciousness works and then applying those principles systematically, day after day, until your mind becomes a finely tuned instrument capable of remarkable things. He studied people from all walks of life: the struggling student who became a scholar, the timid speaker who became commanding and persuasive, the scattered thinker who developed laser-like focus. And he identified the exact mental practices that made these transformations possible. The first principle, and this is absolutely crucial, is that attention is the steering wheel of consciousness. Where your attention goes, your mental energy flows, and where your mental energy flows consistently, your life follows. Most people go through life with their attention scattered in 1,000 directions, pulled by every notification, every worry, every passing impulse. They're like ships without rudders, drifting wherever the current takes them, wondering why they never reach the destinations they dream about. But when you learn to control your attention, to direct it purposefully, and hold it steady on what truly matters, everything changes. You're no longer reactive, you're creative. You're no longer a passenger, you're the captain. Stratton taught that developing concentrated attention is like building a muscle. It requires consistent practice against resistance. When you sit down to focus on a challenging task and your mind wants to wander, that's the resistance. When you gently but firmly bring your attention back to the task, that's the repetition that builds strength. Do this 10 times in a session, and you've done 10 mental repetitions. Do it daily for weeks and months, and you develop a capacity for concentration that most people never experience, a capacity that allows you to think deeper, work longer, and achieve more than you ever thought possible. But here's what makes this so powerful: concentrated attention doesn't just help you work better, it literally changes what you're capable of perceiving and understanding. When your mind is scattered, you see only surfaces, you miss connections, you overlook opportunities, you fail to grasp the deeper patterns that govern success in any field. When your attention is focused and sustained, you begin to see things others miss. You notice the subtle connections between ideas. You recognize patterns before they become obvious. You develop what appears to others as intuition or genius, but is actually just the natural result of a well-trained mind operating at a higher level. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. There was a young man, let's call him Thomas, who felt completely ordinary, even inadequate. He watched others succeed while he struggled. He'd start projects with enthusiasm but lose interest within days. His mind felt like a crowded room where everyone was talking at once, and he couldn't hear his own thoughts clearly. He stumbled across Stratton's work almost by accident, and what he learned changed everything. Thomas started with just 5 minutes a day of attention training, choosing a single object and studying it with complete focus, noting every detail, every time his mind wandered, bringing it back without judgment or frustration. The first week was torture. His mind rebelled constantly. 2 minutes felt like 20. But Thomas persisted, and something remarkable happened. By the second week, 5 minutes became manageable. By the first month, he'd extended to 15 minutes, and he noticed something strange. Tasks that used to take him hours were getting done in half the time. Reading that used to feel like slogging through mud became engaging and efficient. Conversations became richer because he was actually present instead of thinking about what to say next. Within 6 months, Thomas had transformed not just his productivity, but his entire experience of life. He'd unlocked mental power he didn't know he possessed, and it all started with the simple practice of training his attention. This brings us to the second major principle Stratton emphasized: the law of mental habits. Your mind operates largely on autopilot, running programs you installed through repetition, often without realizing you were installing them. Every time you respond to a situation in a particular way, you strengthen that response pattern. Every time you think a certain type of thought, you make that type of thinking more automatic. This is a double-edged sword. It means bad mental habits can trap you in cycles of mediocrity or misery, but it also means that by deliberately installing powerful mental habits, you can automate excellence. Think about how you react when you encounter a setback. Do you immediately spiral into thoughts of failure and self-criticism, or do you instinctively look for lessons and opportunities? Neither response is who you truly are. They're just habits, and habits can be changed. Stratton discovered that the key is not to fight bad habits directly. That usually just strengthens them through attention, but rather to install new habits that naturally replace the old ones. If you have a habit of anxious thinking, you don't battle the anxiety. You practice a new habit of redirecting your attention to solution-focused thinking, to gratitude, to breathing, to presence. Do this consistently, and the new pattern becomes automatic. The process works like this. First, you identify the mental habit you want to develop. Maybe it's the habit of calm focus, or creative problem-solving, or maintaining optimism under pressure, or speaking with confidence. Second, You create a trigger, a specific situation or cue that will remind you to practice this new habit. Third, you practice the new response every single time that trigger occurs without exception, even when it feels awkward or unnatural. Fourth, you attach a small reward to the practice, maybe just acknowledging that you did it, maybe feeling satisfaction in keeping your commitment to yourself. Over time, usually 30 to 90 days, depending on the complexity of the habit, the new pattern becomes automatic, and what once required effort now happens naturally. One of the most powerful habits Stratton advocated developing was the habit of constructive self-talk. The conversation you have with yourself, the running commentary in your head about who you are and what you're capable of, this inner dialogue shapes your reality more than any external circumstance. Most people are walking around with a harsh inner critic that would be arrested if it spoke to others the way it speaks to them. This critic isn't protecting you or making you better, it's crippling your potential, eroding your confidence, and programming your subconscious mind with limitations. Stratton taught that you must become aware of this inner voice and consciously choose to reshape it. When you catch yourself thinking limiting thoughts like, "I always mess this up," or "I'm not smart enough," or "I can't do this," you interrupt the pattern. Not with denial or positive fluff, but with truth and possibility. Instead of "I always mess this up," you might say, "I've struggled with this in the past, but I'm learning and improving," or "That's one perspective, but it's not the whole truth about who I am and what I'm capable of." This isn't about lying to yourself, it's about being fair to yourself, giving yourself the same benefit of the doubt and encouragement you'd give to someone you cared about. The transformation that happens when you shift your self-talk is profound. Your confidence grows not from arrogance, but from realistic self-assessment and genuine self-support. Your resilience increases because you're no longer your own worst enemy. Your creativity expands because you're not shutting down ideas before they fully form. Your relationships improve because the way you talk to yourself affects how you relate to others. And perhaps most importantly, your subconscious mind begins accepting new programming, new beliefs about what's possible for you, and those beliefs shape your actions, which shape your results, which reinforce the beliefs in an upward spiral of development. Now let's talk about the third principle, the power of mental imagery. Stratton was ahead of his time in recognizing that the images you hold in your mind are not passive pictures, they're active forces that influence your emotions, your behavior, and even your physical capabilities. When you vividly imagine yourself performing an action, your brain activates many of the same neural networks that fire when you actually perform that action. Athletes have known this for decades. Mental rehearsal improves physical performance measurably, but the implications go far beyond sports. If you want to develop any quality or capability, whether it's confidence, eloquence, leadership, creativity, or anything else, you can accelerate your development by regularly visualizing yourself embodying that quality. Not vague daydreaming, but focused, detailed mental rehearsal. You see yourself in specific situations, notice how you stand, how you speak, how you think, how you respond to challenges. You engage all your senses. What do you see, hear, feel? The more vivid and detailed the imagery, the more powerful its effect on your nervous system and subconscious mind. Here's why this works so powerfully. Your subconscious mind, which controls most of your automatic behaviors and responses, doesn't distinguish clearly between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you repeatedly visualize yourself handling a challenging presentation with confidence and skill, your subconscious begins to accept that as your identity, as who you are. Then, when the actual situation arises, instead of freezing or fumbling, you perform closer to the way you've been mentally rehearsing. It's not magic, it's the natural result of programming your mind deliberately instead of letting random circumstances program it for you. Stratton recommended spending at least 10 to 15 minutes daily on purposeful visualization, ideally at the same time each day to build the habit. Morning visualization sets the tone for your day, priming your mind for the qualities and capabilities you want to express. Evening visualization can help process the day's experiences and prepare for the next day. The key is consistency and vividness. Don't just think about what you want. See it, feel it, experience it mentally as if it were happening right now. Let me tell you about Sarah, a woman who used this principle to transform her career. Sarah was terrified of public speaking, to the point where it was limiting her professional advancement. She knew she had valuable ideas to contribute, but the thought of presenting them to a group filled her with such anxiety that she'd avoid opportunities or perform poorly when she couldn't avoid them. After learning Stratton's principles, she began a daily practice of visualization. Every morning for 15 minutes, she'd sit quietly and vividly imagine herself speaking to groups, seeing herself standing tall, speaking clearly, feeling calm and confident, watching her audience engaged and receptive. She made it detailed, imagining specific rooms, specific topics, even potential questions, and her composed responses. At first, even the visualization triggered anxiety. Her body would tense up, just imagining the scenarios. But she persisted, and gradually something shifted. The mental rehearsal became easier, more natural. When opportunities to speak arose, she found herself less anxious, more prepared. Her actual presentations started reflecting her mental rehearsal, not perfectly at first, but progressively better. Within a year, Sarah had not only overcome her fear but had become known in her organization as an engaging and effective presenter. The capability was always there, but it was locked behind fear and limiting beliefs. Mental imagery was the key that unlocked it. The fourth principle Stratton emphasized is the critical importance of purposeful reading and learning. Your mind is shaped by what you feed it, and in today's world, most people are feeding their minds junk food, mindless entertainment, negative news, shallow social media content, and gossip. Then they wonder why they feel unfocused, anxious, and unable to think clearly or deeply. Stratton taught that developing mental power requires being selective and purposeful about what information you allow into your consciousness. This doesn't mean becoming closed-minded or avoiding different perspectives. It means recognizing that attention is limited and precious, and you want to invest it in material that elevates, educates, and expands your mind rather than clutters or degrades it. Reading, particularly reading challenging material that makes you think, is one of the most powerful tools for mental development. When you read deeply, you're not just acquiring information, you're exercising comprehension, analysis, synthesis, critical thinking, and imagination all at once. You're building neural connections and expanding your conceptual frameworks. But not all reading is equally valuable. Stratton distinguished between passive reading, where words flow through your mind, leaving little trace, and active reading, where you engage with the material, question it, connect it to what you already know, consider its implications, and extract practical value. Active reading is slower but incomparably more valuable. One book read actively can transform your thinking, while 100 books read passively leave you essentially unchanged. The practice of active reading involves several techniques. First, you read with specific questions or purposes in mind. What am I trying to learn or understand from this material? Second, you pause regularly to reflect on what you've read. How does this connect to my life or work? What can I do with this information? Third, you take notes, not transcribing the text, but capturing your thoughts, insights, and applications. Fourth, you discuss or teach what you've learned, which forces you to organize and clarify your understanding. These practices transform reading from passive consumption to active construction of knowledge and capability. Beyond reading, Stratton emphasized the importance of seeking out experiences and conversations that challenge and expand your thinking. Mental power doesn't grow in comfort zones, it grows at the edges, where you encounter ideas that puzzle you, perspectives that challenge your assumptions, problems that stretch your capabilities. Many people avoid this discomfort, staying in familiar mental territory where everything makes sense and nothing is threatening, but this is mental stagnation disguised as comfort. If you want to develop real mental power, you must actively seek the discomfort of growth. This might mean tackling subjects you find difficult, engaging with people who think very differently than you do, taking on projects that seem slightly beyond your current abilities, or exploring questions that don't have easy answers. Each time you do this, you're expanding your mental capacity, building new neural pathways, developing cognitive flexibility and strength. It's uncomfortable, sometimes frustrating, but it's the only path to genuine development. The fifth principle involves understanding and harnessing the power of emotion in mental development. Stratton recognized that pure rationality, divorced from emotion, is actually weak and ineffective. The most powerful mental processes occur when reason and emotion are working together, when your goals are backed by genuine feeling, when your thinking is energized by passion and purpose. Emotions are not the enemy of mental power, they're the fuel that drives sustained effort and breakthrough thinking. The key is learning to work with emotions intelligently, rather than being controlled by them or trying to suppress them. When you feel strong emotion, whether positive or negative, that's valuable information and energy. Fear might be telling you something needs attention. Anger might be highlighting an injustice or boundary violation. Excitement might be pointing toward genuine opportunity. Sadness might be processing loss or signaling misalignment with your values. Rather than judging emotions as good or bad, Stratton taught viewing them as data and energy that can be channeled productively. This requires developing emotional awareness and regulation, the ability to notice what you're feeling, understand why you're feeling it, and choose how to respond rather than reacting automatically. When you develop this capacity, emotions become allies rather than obstacles. You can use anxiety as a signal to prepare more thoroughly. You can channel anger into determined action toward positive change. You can harness enthusiasm to fuel consistent effort. You can allow sadness to deepen your compassion and humanity. One of the most powerful emotional practices Stratton advocated was cultivating genuine enthusiasm for your goals and development. Not forced fake positivity, but real, deeply felt excitement about who you're becoming and what you're creating. When you connect with this feeling regularly, everything changes. Tasks that seemed like drudgery become engaging. Obstacles that seemed insurmountable become interesting challenges. Setbacks that would have devastated you become temporary and instructive. Enthusiasm doesn't make the path easy, but it makes you capable of walking it, day after day, until you reach destinations that once seemed impossible. The way to cultivate this enthusiasm is to regularly reconnect with your deeper purposes and values. Why are you developing mental power? What will it allow you to do, to create, to contribute, to experience? Who will you become in the process? When you take time to vividly connect with these deeper motivations, not just think about them intellectually but feel them emotionally, you tap into a renewable source of energy and commitment that carries you through the inevitable difficulties of growth. Let me share one more story that brings these principles together. Marcus was a middle-aged man who felt he'd wasted his potential. He'd spent decades in jobs he didn't care about, in relationships that weren't fulfilling, pursuing goals that society told him mattered, but that left him empty. He felt it was too late to change, that he'd missed his chance, that mental decline was inevitable with age. Then he discovered that neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and grow, continues throughout life. You're never too old to develop mental power, to learn new skills, to reshape your thinking, to become someone different and better. Marcus committed to the practices Stratton outlined. He started training his attention for just 10 minutes daily. He began reshaping his mental habits, particularly his self-talk and his responses to difficulty. He practiced daily visualization, seeing himself as capable, engaged, and purposeful. He became selective about what he read and watched, choosing material that elevated rather than degraded his consciousness. He worked with his emotions, using them as guidance and fuel, rather than letting them control him. The changes didn't happen overnight. For weeks, it felt like nothing was happening. But Marcus trusted the process and persisted. Around the 2-month mark, he started noticing shifts. Tasks required less willpower. Focusing felt more natural. His mood was more stable and positive. Ideas came more easily. He felt more present in conversations, more confident in decisions, more alive in general. By 6 months, people who knew him commented that he seemed like a different person, more energetic, more focused, more purposeful. By a year, Marcus had changed careers, pursuing work he'd always dreamed of but thought was unrealistic. He'd developed new skills he thought were beyond him. He'd transformed not just his external circumstances, but his entire inner experience of life. And here's the thing, Marcus wasn't extraordinary. He didn't have special advantages. He simply applied proven principles consistently over time. That's the promise and the challenge of developing mental power. The principles work reliably for anyone who applies them, but they only work if you actually do apply them, consistently, patiently, persistently, even when you don't see immediate results. This is where most people fail, not because the principles don't work, but because they give up before the principles have time to work. Stratton understood this challenge, and he emphasized the importance of what he called mental momentum. When you first start any new mental practice, resistance is high and results are invisible. It takes maximum effort for minimum visible return. This is when most people quit, thinking it's not working or they're not capable. But if you push through this initial phase, something magical happens. The practices become easier, more natural. even enjoyable, results start becoming visible. Momentum builds. What once required grinding willpower now happens almost automatically. You're not fighting yourself anymore. You're flowing with your developing capabilities. The key to building this momentum is starting small and staying consistent. Don't try to overhaul your entire mental life overnight. Pick one practice, maybe attention training, or mental visualization, or active reading, and commit to doing it daily for at least 30 days, even if just for 10 or 15 minutes. Make it so small and manageable that you have no excuse not to do it. Once that practice becomes habitual and you're seeing results, add another. Build gradually, allowing each new habit to stabilize before adding the next. This approach might seem slow, but it's actually the fastest path to real, lasting transformation. The alternative, trying to change everything at once, leads to overwhelm, inconsistency, and eventually giving up, leaving you right back where you started. Slow and steady doesn't just win the race, it's often the only approach that actually gets you to the finish line. Another crucial aspect of developing mental power that Stratton explored is the relationship between physical health and mental capability. Your brain is a physical organ, and it functions better or worse depending on how you treat your body. When you're sleep-deprived, your attention suffers, your emotional regulation weakens, your creativity dims, your memory falters. When you eat poorly, feeding your body junk, your brain doesn't get the nutrients it needs for optimal function. When you're sedentary, blood flow to your brain decreases, neural connections weaken, mood drops. You simply cannot develop your full mental potential while neglecting your physical health. This doesn't mean you need to become an athlete or follow some extreme diet. It means taking care of the basics, getting adequate sleep, generally between 7 and 9 hours for most adults, eating real food that nourishes your body rather than just filling your stomach, moving your body regularly in ways that get your heart rate up and blood flowing, and managing stress so it doesn't become chronic and damaging. These aren't optional extras. If you're serious about mental development, they're foundational requirements. Stratton particularly emphasized sleep as non-negotiable. During sleep, your brain consolidates memories, processes emotions, clears out toxins that build up during waking hours, and prepares for the next day's challenges. Chronic sleep deprivation is like trying to run high-performance software on a failing computer. Nothing works properly, everything is harder than it should be, and eventually the system crashes. Yet so many people sacrifice sleep for productivity, not realizing they're destroying the very capacity that makes productivity possible. Similarly, regular physical exercise isn't just good for your body, it's one of the most powerful things you can do for your brain. Exercise increases blood flow to the brain, promotes the growth of new neurons, enhances the connections between brain cells, reduces inflammation, and triggers the release of chemicals that improve mood and cognitive function. People who exercise regularly consistently outperform sedentary people on tests of memory, attention, processing speed, and executive function. If there were a pill that did what exercise does for the brain, everyone would be clamoring for it. The good news is you don't need a pill. You just need to move your body consistently. The nutrition piece is also critical, but often misunderstood. Your brain is extremely energy-intensive, using about 20% of your body's calories despite being only about 2% of your body weight. It needs stable energy, which means avoiding the blood sugar roller coaster of high sugar, high-refined carbohydrate diets. It needs healthy fats for brain cell membranes and neural insulation. It needs protein for neurotransmitter production. It needs vitamins and minerals for countless biochemical processes. You don't need a perfect diet, but you do need a generally healthy one if you want your brain operating at its best. Bringing these pieces together, physical health, mental practices, emotional intelligence, purposeful learning, Stratton showed that developing mental power is a holistic process. You can't just work on one aspect while neglecting others and expect optimal results. The good news is that progress in one area tends to support progress in others. When you start exercising, you often naturally want to eat better. When you improve your sleep, your emotional regulation improves, making your mental practices easier. When you develop your focus, you become more aware of how physical factors affect your mental state. It all works together, creating an upward spiral of development. Now, let's address something crucial that often gets overlooked: the role of relationships and social environment in mental development. Stratton recognized that humans are fundamentally social creatures, and our thinking is profoundly influenced by the people we spend time with. If you surround yourself with pessimists, cynics, and people who've given up on growth, their mindsets will gradually infect yours, no matter how strong you think your individual mental discipline is. Conversely, when you're regularly around people who are growing, learning, pursuing meaningful goals, and supporting each other's development, you're pulled upward by the collective energy and standards of the group. This doesn't mean abandoning people in your life who aren't on a growth path, but it does mean being intentional about seeking out and spending time with people who inspire and challenge you, who see your potential and encourage you toward it, who are themselves committed to growth and development. These relationships are invaluable. They provide accountability when your motivation wavers, perspective when you're stuck, celebration when you succeed, and the lived proof that growth and transformation are possible. In today's connected world, you're not limited to the people in your immediate physical vicinity. You can join online communities, attend workshops and events, find mentors virtually, and create a growth-oriented social environment, even if everyone in your immediate physical world is stuck. But this requires intentionality. It won't happen accidentally. You have to actively seek out and cultivate these connections. Stratton also emphasized the importance of giving as well as receiving in these relationships. When you share what you're learning, when you encourage others in their growth, when you hold space for someone else's struggle or celebration, you're not just being nice. You're deepening your own understanding and strengthening your own commitment. Teaching others is one of the most powerful learning tools there is. Supporting others in their growth clarifies and reinforces your own values and practices. The relationships that matter most are those characterized by mutual growth and support, not one-sided taking or giving. Let's talk now about the role of adversity and difficulty in developing mental power. This might be uncomfortable to hear, but Stratton was clear. You develop strength by overcoming resistance, and you develop mental power by navigating challenges, setbacks, and difficulties successfully. Easy, comfortable lives don't build mental power, they allow it to atrophy. This doesn't mean seeking out suffering for its own sake, but it does mean reframing your relationship with difficulty. Most people see obstacles, setbacks, and challenges as problems to be avoided, as evidence that something is wrong, as reasons to give up or feel sorry for themselves. Stratton taught a radically different perspective. Difficulties are the training ground where mental power is forged. Every time you face a challenge and work through it, you're building capabilities, resilience, confidence, and wisdom that can't be developed any other way. The person who never faces difficulty never develops the mental strength to handle life's inevitable storms. This means that when you encounter obstacles in your growth process, and you will, the correct response isn't discouragement but recognition. This is the part where I get stronger. This is where real development happens. The frustration I feel right now is the sensation of my mental muscles working against resistance. If I persist through this, I'll emerge more capable than I was before. This shift in perspective doesn't make the difficulty disappear, but it changes its meaning, transforming it from a problem into an opportunity. Stratton told the story of people who achieved extraordinary things, and in every case, their breakthrough came not despite their difficulties, but through them. The setback that forced them to develop a new skill, the failure that revealed a blind spot they needed to address, the rejection that redirected them toward something better, the crisis that clarified what truly mattered. Looking back, they could see that what seemed like disasters at the time were actually necessary steps in their development. You can learn to see this while you're in the difficulty rather than only in retrospect, and that perspective shift is itself a form of mental power that serves you for life. Here's a practical framework for working with difficulty that Stratton would endorse. First, acknowledge the reality of the situation without dramatizing or minimizing it. This is challenging, and that's okay. Second, separate the facts of what happened from your interpretation of what it means. Losing a job is a fact. Thinking you're a failure is an interpretation, and probably an inaccurate one. Third, look for what you can learn or how you can grow from this situation. What skills can you develop? What blind spots is this revealing? What opportunities might open up? Fourth, take whatever action is available to you, even if small, even if imperfect. Action creates momentum and hope. Finally, trust that you're developing capabilities through this process that will serve you for years to come. One of the most powerful mental capabilities you can develop, and one that Stratton emphasized strongly, is the ability to maintain equanimity, a balanced, steady state of mind regardless of external circumstances. This doesn't mean not feeling emotions or not caring about outcomes. It means not being thrown off center by events, not swinging wildly from euphoria to despair based on whether things are going well or poorly in the moment. Equanimity is the quality that allows you to keep thinking clearly in crisis, to stay committed when success is distant, to remain humble in victory and courageous in defeat. Developing equanimity requires understanding that your experience of life is created far more by how you relate to events than by the events themselves. Two people can experience the exact same circumstance and have completely different experiences based on their mental habits, their interpretations, their ability to regulate their emotional responses. The person with equanimity has trained their mind to find the steady center, to observe their reactions without being controlled by them, to maintain perspective even when emotions are strong. This is cultivated through practices like mindfulness meditation, where you train yourself to observe your thoughts and emotions without getting caught up in them, recognizing that they're temporary phenomena passing through your consciousness rather than fundamental truths about reality. It's cultivated through deliberately practicing different responses to challenging situations, choosing calm over panic, curiosity over judgment, acceptance over resistance when resistance is futile. Over time, these practices reshape your default responses, and equanimity becomes increasingly natural. The practical benefit of equanimity is enormous. When you're not being constantly knocked off balance by every change in circumstance, you have vastly more energy available for productive action. You make better decisions because you're not reacting from a place of anxiety or desperation. You maintain better relationships because you're not projecting your inner turbulence onto others. You experience greater life satisfaction because you're not on an emotional roller coaster. Equanimity is not emotional flatness or not caring, it's emotional maturity and strength. Stratton also explored the fascinating relationship between creativity and mental power. Many people think creativity is something you either have or don't, a mysterious gift bestowed on a lucky few. But Stratton showed that creativity is actually a skill that can be developed systematically through specific mental practices. Creative thinking isn't about having unprecedented ideas appear magically. It's about learning to make novel connections between existing ideas, to see patterns others miss, to approach problems from unconventional angles, to persist through the uncertainty and ambiguity that creative work requires. One key to developing creativity is exposing yourself to diverse inputs and experiences. Creativity often happens at the intersection of different domains, when someone sees how a principle from one field applies to a completely different field. The more varied your knowledge and experience, the more raw material your mind has to work with in making creative connections. This is why the most creative people are often those with eclectic interests who read widely, travel broadly, converse with people from different backgrounds, and generally avoid getting trapped in a narrow specialty. Another key is learning to work productively with the different phases of the creative process. There's a gathering phase where you're collecting information and experiences without necessarily knowing what you'll do with them. There's an incubation phase where you step back and let your unconscious mind work on problems without forcing solutions. There's an illumination phase where insights emerge, often when you're not actively working on the problem. And there's a verification phase where you test, refine, and implement your ideas. Many people try to force creativity by staying constantly in the active working phase, but the other phases are equally important. Stratton particularly emphasized the importance of allowing time for mental rest and what we might call productive idleness, time when you're not consuming information or actively working, but simply allowing your mind to wander and make connections. In our hyper-connected, constantly stimulated modern world, we've almost eliminated this time, filling every spare moment with phones, screens, and information consumption. But many of the greatest insights in history came during walks, baths, quiet contemplation, activities where the conscious mind relaxed and the unconscious mind had space to work. If you want to develop creative mental power, you need to protect time for this kind of open, unstructured thinking. Let's talk about the importance of having a compelling vision for your life and development. Stratton understood that mental power without direction is just spinning wheels, impressive perhaps, but not actually getting you anywhere meaningful. You need to know what you're developing mental power for, what you want to create, who you want to become, what kind of life you want to build, what contribution you want to make. This vision serves as your North Star, keeping you oriented when the path gets confusing. pulling you forward when motivation wavers, giving meaning to the daily practices that might otherwise seem tedious. Creating this vision requires going deeper than surface goals or social expectations. It's not about what you think you should want or what would impress others. It's about connecting with what genuinely matters to you, what makes you feel alive and purposeful, what kind of person you want to become regardless of external rewards or recognition. This often requires quiet reflection, journaling, experimentation, conversation with people who know you well, and honest self-examination. It's not always comfortable because it might reveal that you've been pursuing goals that don't actually align with your deeper values and desires. But once you have clarity on this vision, everything changes. Decisions become easier because you have a clear criterion. Does this move me toward or away from who I want to become and what I want to create? Motivation becomes more sustainable because you're not just trying to force yourself to do things, you're pulled by genuine desire toward something meaningful. Setbacks become less devastating because you understand them as temporary obstacles on a longer journey that still matters. Your vision gives context and meaning to everything else. Stratton recommended regularly revisiting and refining your vision, ideally through some kind of structured reflection practice, maybe weekly or monthly, where you assess whether your daily actions are aligned with your larger vision, where you celebrate progress, where you adjust your course based on what you're learning about yourself and what works. This isn't about rigid adherence to some plan you created years ago. It's about maintaining conscious, intentional direction in your life rather than just drifting wherever circumstances push you. One of the subtle but powerful aspects of mental development that Stratton identified is learning to work with your mind's natural rhythms and capacities rather than against them. Different times of day, you have different cognitive capabilities. For most people, complex analytical thinking is strongest in the morning. Creative synthesis often peaks in the late morning or early afternoon. Routine tasks are fine for the post-lunch energy dip. Reflection and planning work well in the evening. These patterns vary individually, but everyone has them. When you organize your work and life according to these natural rhythms, you accomplish far more with less effort and stress. You do your most important, mentally demanding work when your cognitive capabilities are at their peak. You save routine tasks for times when your mental energy is lower. You don't fight your natural afternoon lull with caffeine and willpower. You work with it by doing less demanding activities during that time. This requires paying attention to your own patterns and then having some control over how you structure your time, which isn't always possible but is worth pursuing as much as you're able. Stratton also recognized the profound importance of rest and recovery in mental development. Just as muscles need rest between workouts to grow stronger, your mind needs genuine rest to consolidate learning, process experiences, and restore its full capacity. This isn't the same as distraction or mindless entertainment, which often leaves you more depleted rather than refreshed. Real rest involves activities that genuinely restore your mental energy, time in nature, meaningful conversation, creative hobbies, physical movement, quiet reflection, whatever actually leaves you feeling renewed rather than just numbed. Many high achievers fall into the trap of constant mental engagement, always working, always consuming information, always striving, thinking that rest is for the weak or that they'll rest when they've achieved their goals. But this approach leads inevitably to burnout, diminished cognitive function, health problems, and ironically, reduced achievement. The most sustainably productive people aren't those who work longest, they're those who work with intensity during focused periods and then genuinely rest and recover, creating a sustainable rhythm rather than a race to exhaustion. Understanding the power of questions is another dimension of mental development that Stratton explored deeply. The quality of your thinking is determined largely by the quality of questions you ask yourself and others. Poor questions lead to poor thinking. What's wrong with me? Why do bad things always happen to me? Why can't I ever succeed? These questions presuppose negative answers and send your mind searching for evidence to confirm the negative premise. Powerful questions open up new possibilities. What can I learn from this? How can I approach this differently? What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? What matters most right now? Learning to consciously craft better questions is a skill that pays dividends across every area of life. When facing a problem, instead of asking, "Why is this so hard?" you ask what specifically is challenging about this and what resources or approaches might address that challenge. When feeling stuck, instead of asking, "Why am I so incompetent?" you ask, "What assumption might I be making that's limiting my thinking?" Or who has solved similar challenges that I could learn from? When planning, instead of asking, "What do I feel like doing?" you ask, "What would my future self thank me for doing right now?" This practice of questioning extends to examining your assumptions and beliefs. Most people go through life never questioning the mental models they've absorbed about how the world works, what's possible, who they are, what they're capable of. These unexamined assumptions become invisible prisons, limiting what you even consider attempting. Stratton encouraged the practice of regularly identifying and examining your core assumptions, bringing them into conscious awareness where you can evaluate whether they're actually true and useful or whether they're outdated, inaccurate, or limiting. For example, you might have the unexamined assumption that you're not good at learning new things, based perhaps on struggles in school years ago. If you never examine this assumption, it becomes an invisible ceiling on your development. You don't even try to learn certain things because you've already decided you can't. But if you bring this assumption into consciousness and examine it critically, you might recognize that your childhood learning struggles were due to specific circumstances, teaching methods that didn't work for you, lack of motivation for material that didn't interest you, or any number of factors that have nothing to do with your fundamental learning capacity. Examining and discarding this limiting assumption opens up enormous new possibilities. The development of wisdom is perhaps the highest form of mental power, and it's something Stratton addressed with nuance and depth. Wisdom isn't the same as intelligence or knowledge, though it can incorporate both. Wisdom is the ability to see clearly, to understand the deeper patterns and principles that govern human flourishing, to make choices that serve your long-term well-being and growth rather than just immediate gratification, to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to act with both courage and compassion. Wisdom is what allows you to navigate life's complexity with grace and effectiveness. Wisdom develops through several pathways. One is experience, particularly experience that includes both successes and failures, both joy and suffering, processed with reflection and self-honesty rather than defensiveness or denial. Another is learning from others, both through direct mentorship and through studying the lives and teachings of wise people throughout history. Another is developing self-awareness, understanding your own patterns, biases, triggers, and tendencies so you can see yourself clearly and make conscious choices rather than reacting automatically. Another is cultivating humility, recognizing how much you don't know and remaining open to learning from unexpected sources. Stratton emphasized that wisdom often involves holding paradoxes, recognizing that two seemingly contradictory truths can both be valid. You need to be confident in your capabilities while remaining humble about your limitations. You need to work hard toward your goals while also accepting what you cannot control. You need to take full responsibility for your choices while having compassion for yourself when you fall short. You need to be realistic about challenges while maintaining optimism about possibilities. The immature mind wants everything simple and black and white. The wise mind can hold complexity and nuance. One of the most practical applications of developing mental power is in the realm of decision-making. Every day you make countless decisions, from trivial to life-altering, and the quality of these decisions compounds over time to create the quality of your life. Poor decision-making based on impulse, emotion, social pressure, or fuzzy thinking leads to problems that require more decisions to address, creating a downward spiral. Excellent decision-making based on clarity about values, realistic assessment of options, and integration of reason and intuition leads to better outcomes that create more opportunities, an upward spiral. Stratton taught that good decision-making requires several elements. First, clarity about what you're actually trying to achieve. What outcome matters most in this situation? Second, honest assessment of your real options, not fantasizing about options that don't exist while ignoring real possibilities. Third, realistic evaluation of likely consequences, both short and long-term, for each option. Fourth, understanding your own decision-making biases and compensating for them. Fifth, having the courage to commit to a decision and act on it, rather than remaining paralyzed by uncertainty. Many people struggle with decision-making because they're trying to find the perfect choice, the option with no downsides or risks. But in reality, every significant choice involves trade-offs. Every option has both advantages and costs. Good decision-making isn't about finding the perfect choice. It's about understanding the trade-offs clearly and choosing the option whose benefits matter most to you and whose costs you're willing to pay. It's also about recognizing that not deciding is itself a decision, usually one that hands control to external circumstances rather than keeping it with you. Another powerful practice Stratton advocated is regular self-assessment and course correction. At regular intervals, maybe weekly or monthly, you take time to honestly evaluate how you're doing, where you're making progress, where you're stuck or regressing, what's working and what isn't. This isn't about harsh self-judgment. It's about honest self-awareness in service of growth. When you identify that something isn't working, you don't berate yourself, you adjust your approach. When you notice progress, you acknowledge it and consider what's contributing to that progress so you can do more of it. This practice prevents you from spending months or years continuing approaches that aren't serving you just because you started down that path and haven't stopped to evaluate. It also helps you recognize and build on what is working, which people often fail to do because they're so focused on problems. Regular self-assessment, done with honesty and compassion, creates a feedback loop that accelerates your development enormously. Let's address the reality that developing mental power is not a linear process. You won't improve steadily every day. There will be plateaus where you seem to be making no progress. Despite consistent effort, these are often periods where invisible internal reorganization is happening, preparing you for the next leap forward. There will be setbacks where you slide backward, losing ground you thought you'd gained. These are opportunities to practice resilience and recommitment. There will be breakthroughs where suddenly things that were difficult become easy, capabilities emerge that weren't there before, understanding crystallizes in new ways. Understanding and accepting this non-linear nature of growth helps you persist through the difficult phases. When you're on a plateau and it feels like nothing is working, remembering that plateaus are normal and often precede breakthroughs helps you keep going. When you have a setback, recognizing that temporary regression is part of any growth process helps you respond with adjustment rather than despair. When you have a breakthrough, appreciating it while knowing more challenges will come helps you stay grounded and committed to ongoing practice. The role of courage in mental development deserves attention. It takes courage to examine your assumptions honestly, to change long-standing mental habits, to persist with practices when you don't see immediate results, to face truths about yourself that aren't flattering, to attempt things you might fail at, to maintain your commitment to growth when people around you are settled for mediocrity. Mental development isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's an act of courage repeated daily. Stratton recognized that many people fail to develop their potential not because they lack capability, but because they lack courage. The courage to be different, to stand out, to risk failure, to endure temporary discomfort for long-term gain, to bet on themselves. Developing mental power requires cultivating this courage, not as reckless bravado, but as quiet determination to keep moving forward despite fear and uncertainty. Each time you practice courage in small ways, you strengthen it, making larger acts of courage more accessible. Consider the mental power required for perseverance, the ability to maintain effort and commitment over extended periods despite obstacles, setbacks, and the absence of immediate rewards. This is perhaps one of the most valuable capabilities you can develop because most worthwhile achievements require sustained effort over months or years. The person who can persevere, who can keep showing up and doing the work day after day, even when it's hard and progress is invisible, that person will eventually accomplish things that seem impossible to others. Perseverance isn't about mindless, stubborn persistence, regardless of feedback. It's about maintaining commitment to what matters while remaining flexible about approach. If something isn't working, you adjust how you're doing it, but you don't abandon the goal at the first sign of difficulty. This requires distinguishing between productive struggle, where you're making progress even though it's hard, and unproductive struggle, where you're banging your head against a wall and need to try a different approach. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Stratton also explored the connection between mental power and contribution. As you develop your capabilities, you have a choice about how to use them. You can use them purely for personal gain, and there's nothing wrong with improving your life. But the deepest satisfaction and meaning often comes from using your developed capabilities in service of something beyond yourself, contributing to others, solving meaningful problems, creating value, making things better in some way. This isn't about self-sacrifice. It's about recognizing that you're part of a larger human community and that using your gifts in service of that community enriches your life as much as it helps others. When your mental development is connected to contribution, it takes on additional energy and meaning. You're not just getting better for its own sake, you're developing capabilities that allow you to make a difference. This sense of purpose sustains motivation through difficult periods and provides deep satisfaction that purely self-focused achievement cannot match. It also tends to accelerate your development because you're applying what you're learning in real situations with real stakes, which deepens and solidifies learning in ways that purely theoretical study cannot. Throughout all of this, Stratton emphasized the fundamental importance of self-compassion. The path of mental development involves constant confrontation with your current limitations. You try to focus, and your mind wanders. You attempt something difficult and fail. You slide back into old patterns you thought you'd overcome. If you respond to these experiences with harsh self-judgment and criticism, you create additional suffering and often sabotage your progress. Self-criticism might feel motivating in the moment, but research shows it actually undermines performance and well-being over time. Self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you'd offer a good friend who was struggling. When you mess up, you acknowledge it honestly without dramatization, learn what you can from it, and move forward with renewed commitment. When you're struggling, you recognize that struggle is part of growth, that everyone experiences it, and that you deserve support and encouragement, including from yourself. This doesn't mean lowering standards or making excuses. It means maintaining high standards while also maintaining kindness toward yourself in the process of reaching them. The practice of gratitude is another element that enhances mental development. When you regularly acknowledge what's going well, what you appreciate, what you're grateful for, you're training your mind to notice positive aspects of your experience rather than fixating solely on problems and deficiencies. This doesn't mean denying challenges or pretending everything is perfect. It means maintaining a balanced perspective that includes both difficulties and blessings. Gratitude also helps maintain motivation for growth. When you appreciate how far you've come, rather than only focusing on how far you have to go, you feel encouraged and energized rather than discouraged and depleted. When you feel grateful for opportunities to grow rather than resentful of the effort required, your entire experience of the development process changes. Gratitude isn't just positive thinking, it's a powerful practice that genuinely shifts your mental state and your experience of life. Let me share one final story that synthesizes these principles. There was a woman named Elena who felt her life had become small and predictable. She went through her days on autopilot, competent but not engaged, successful by conventional measures but deeply unfulfilled. She knew something needed to change but didn't know what or how. When she encountered ideas about mental development and human potential, something awakened in her. She recognized that she'd been sleepwalking through life, using maybe a fraction of her true capabilities. Elena committed to the journey of developing mental power. She started with attention training, just 10 minutes daily of practicing focus. She began working with her mental habits, particularly her tendency toward worry and her harsh inner critic. She created a vision for a more engaged, meaningful life. She started reading more challenging material and having deeper conversations. She took on projects that stretched her capabilities. She practiced courage in small ways that gradually built her confidence for larger risks. She learned to work with her emotions rather than being controlled by them. She developed equanimity so external events didn't throw her off balance. The transformation took time, over a year before the changes were dramatic. But Elena discovered capabilities she didn't know she had. She changed careers into work that genuinely mattered to her. She developed skills she thought were beyond her reach. She formed deeper relationships. She contributed to causes she cared about. Most importantly, she felt alive and engaged with her life in a way she hadn't since childhood. She hadn't become someone else. She'd become more fully herself, accessing and developing capacities that were always there but dormant. Elena's story isn't unique or special. She didn't have extraordinary advantages or talents. What she had was commitment to the process of growth, willingness to practice consistently, courage to change, and patience to allow the process to unfold. These same qualities are available to anyone reading this, and they lead reliably to transformation when applied with consistency and sincerity. As we bring this exploration to a close, remember that mental power isn't about becoming superhuman or perfect. It's about developing your natural capacities more fully, becoming more of who you truly are, accessing capabilities that exist within you right now but remain undeveloped. Every person has far more potential than they're currently expressing. The tragedy is that most people never discover what they're truly capable of because they never undertake the systematic development of their mental powers. The principles we've explored, attention training, habit formation, mental imagery, purposeful learning, emotional intelligence, physical health, relationships, working with difficulty, equanimity, creativity, vision, wisdom, decision-making, perseverance, contribution, self-compassion, and gratitude, these aren't abstract theories. They're practical tools that work when applied consistently. You don't need to master all of them at once. Start with one, practice it until it becomes natural, then add another. Build your mental power gradually, steadily, patiently. The investment you make in developing your mind is the highest return investment you can possibly make. Every other area of your life, your work, your relationships, your health, your contribution, everything improves when your mental capabilities improve. You become more effective, more creative, more resilient, more clear-thinking, more purposeful, more able to create the life you envision rather than just accepting whatever circumstances deliver. But here's what matters most. You must actually do this, not just read about it or think about it or intend to start someday. Start today, right now, with one simple practice. Maybe it's 10 minutes of attention training. Maybe it's examining one limiting belief. Maybe it's creating a clearer vision for your life. Maybe it's establishing one powerful mental habit. Whatever it is, start small, but start now. Commit to consistency. Trust the process even when results aren't immediately visible. Keep going when it gets hard. Adjust your approach when needed, but maintain your commitment to growth. Your mind is the most powerful tool you possess. And like any tool, it becomes more effective with proper maintenance, training, and use. The difference between where you are now and where you could be is simply the systematic application of proven principles over time. That application requires effort, patience, and courage, but it delivers rewards beyond measure, a life lived more fully, capabilities you never imagined, contributions that matter, and the deep satisfaction of becoming who you were meant to be. Please like and subscribe to Audiobook Library as it helps the channel to grow and bring you more transformative content like this. Your support allows us to continue sharing life-changing wisdom from the greatest minds in personal development and human potential. Each like, each subscription, each share helps this knowledge reach someone who needs it, someone who's ready to transform their life through developing their mental power. Remember that this is just the beginning. The real work, the real transformation, happens not in listening, but in applying what you've learned. Take these principles into your daily life. Practice them consistently. Watch as your capabilities expand, as your life transforms, as you discover what you're truly capable of. The power is already within you. These principles simply help you access and develop it. Thank you for investing this time in your own development. Please check our channel's video library for more wisdom on personal growth, mental development, and human potential. Each audiobook we share has been carefully selected for its power to transform lives when the principles are applied. Your journey of mental development doesn't end with this summary. It's just beginning, and we're honored to be part of it. Now go forth and build the mental power that will transform your life. Start today. Stay consistent. Trust the process. Your extraordinary life is waiting for you to claim it through the deliberate development of your mental capabilities. Everything you need is already within you. These principles simply show you how to access it, develop it, and use it to create the life you've always known was possible. The journey begins now.